Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and blog. I'm so grateful you could join me today. I have a fun watercolor pencil tutorial I'm going to share with you today that is all technique based. And I have excerpted this tutorial from a recent card tutorial that I have on my channel, and I'll link that up as well. But I thought that this would be really valuable to dive in and take a look at all the different things that you can do with your watercolor pencils. So let's go ahead and dive in. But I've been using these watercolor pencils for probably close to 10 years, and I really love them, and they last a really long time. They're very highly pigmented. They just work really well, and I've enjoyed using them for many years on many different projects. So I'm going to just walk you through some techniques today with watercolor pencils, but you could use any brand of watercolor pencils that you have. I will have all of the supplies that I'm using listed below in the notes, no worries. Okay. So I'm going to get into a little bit of a watercolor lesson in this next section and talk and really just kind of break down these watercolor pencils a little bit more and talk to you about the techniques. So I've got my blue watercolor pencil, and here is the direct to paper technique. So I will take the pencil and I'll lay it on my on its side, because you're able to get a more even application of color if you lay it on the side. If you do it from the top, you're going to kind of embed some indents into the watercolor paper, and you don't want to do that. So laying the watercolor pencil on its side and just applying the color, and now I'm just adding water, and you can see how that pigment will break down and it really flows. So when you're doing this direct to paper, you can get some smooth effects, but you can also see some granulation here because that pigment wants to stick a little bit into the fibers and of the paper. So using your brush and using your water, you can just kind of smooth it out. You can also take some of it away. So this is a really intense amount of color. This direct to paper is really fun to do, but you've got to remember that when you're applying the watercolor pencils to the paper, there will be a tendency for the pigments to get lodged into the fibers. Okay, so now I'm going to do dry on wet. So I'm wetting the paper, and then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to apply color into the paper. And you can see that the paper is absorbing the pigment from the pencil, but it's also getting caught in those grooves of the paper. So it's a little less smooth than what I've done over here on the left. It's a little more chunky, but there's a lot more texture. So that is dry on wet. So I applied water to the paper first, and then I went ahead and put some color on top of it. And because you're activating it right from the pencil, you're going to get some of those grooves and some of that pigment that's going to stick into the hills and valleys of the watercolor paper. And this is a really great way to add additional texture to your project. And I'm digging it. I love it. Okay, so the next technique that we're going to do here is painting direct to paper. So going to be utilizing that palette that I have above the paper here, where I've applied my watercolor pencil directly to the palette, and I'm going to break it down on the palette with my brush and water, and then I'm going to go ahead and paint it directly to the paper. So this is a great way to use your watercolor pencils to build up layers, to use your watercolor pencils as a watercolor paint. So if you're really still trying to get comfortable with watercolor, and you feel more comfortable with trying out using watercolor pencils first, you can use your watercolor pencils as watercolor paint. And you can see that I put a little bit down here on the paper, and then I just added some water to it, and you can see that I lifted it up with a brush and I just started to use it as paint. So I've taken a little bit here, a little bit of this blue, and I've put it down on that palette that I have. And this is just a really neat little invention from Caran. It's really inexpensive palette that can be used for markers as well. But this little rough side just kind of enables you to take a little bit, get a little bit of the pigment off so that you can use it as paint. So you can see I'm adding some water to this. And now I'm using my watercolor pencil pigment as paint, and I'm painting direct to paper. And this would be, you would use the same kind of techniques that you would if you were using your watercolor pan sets or your watercolor tubes. So you can really make your watercolor pencils go a long way. And you can also mix your colors here right on your palette. Now, you don't need this little textured palette to do this technique. You can take a piece of watercolor paper and you could scratch down some of the color, and then you could add a little bit of water and you can dip it in and then use that as your palette. Easy peasy. But I just like to share these little fun finds that I find that really helpful when I'm doing my work and doing some of my paper crafting. Okay, so these are the 3 techniques that you can do with your watercolor pencils to create that washy watercolor effects. So we have direct to paper, we have dry on wet, which creates a lot of fun texture, and we have painting direct to paper, which is more of like a traditional kind of watercoloring. But you can use your watercolor pencils to create these watercolor effects. So again, if you're really just getting started out with watercolor and you have a set of watercolor pencils, give this a go and try these techniques. I hope you enjoyed this watercolor tutorial. Thanks so much for joining me. Please consider sharing the joy by liking this video and subscribing to this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.